wake of the Northridge earthquake, with emergency rooms overflowing, Southern California residents are unaware that a vicious killer stalks the Southland. The CDC races to stop a chilling outbreak that infects its victims with a slew of bizarre and terrifying symptoms.
His hands are turning black.
It's excruciating headaches.
We also saw these skin lesions.
But the treatment for this killer could be worse than death itself.
They put the needle right back here to the occiput.
She was just moaning with pain.
Untreated, the mortality is essentially 100%.
I thought, oh my God, am I gonna be next?
Then, a horrendous outbreak of Salmonella enteritidis forces one of the largest food recalls in U.S. history, taking victims of all ages on a terrifying roller coaster of fear and pain.
Disease control measures were no longer working.
We were seeing this as a national outbreak.
It's a horrible, hopeless feeling, not knowing what's wrong with them. I was pretty terrified. I was pretty scared.
Killer pathogens are constantly mutating, multiplying, spreading. These vicious killers hide in plain sight, in the air we breathe, the water we drink, even the touch of a loved one. From small-town doctors to top scientists at the CDC, it's a constant war against an enemy that forever threatens to bring mankind to its knees.
The quake was severe at 6.6 on the Richter scale. Hundreds of homes and businesses are damaged, many beyond repair. Gas lines ruptured and fires raced out of control and sending flames 100 feet into the air.
California is rocked by the largest earthquake to hit an urban area in North American history.
24 people are known dead. Hundreds have been injured. There was a fight for survival. The death toll has been going up all day long.
For 2 weeks, over 15,000 aftershocks, some as strong as 6.1, continue to rattle the Southwest.
The extent of the damage began to hit home.
The residents of the Los Angeles-San Fernando Valley begin to pick up the pieces. 15,000 people are suddenly homeless. Matthew Cole rushes to check in on his father, Eugene.
When I went down there in the early morning, the devastation was incredible. It didn't ruin the house, but every picture, just everything that you think of that wasn't strapped down or tied down was on the floor, just in a big heaping mess.
As they pick up the shattered remains of the Coles' home, Gene is plagued by a persistent cough.
My dad started feeling sick, started coming down with flu-like symptoms, and just shrugged it off. He just thought it was a cold. Another week, 10 days goes by, and he really starts to feel some pains in his back and his chest, having a hard time breathing.
Gene feels flu-like, weak, and fatigued. Finally, he agrees to seek help. By the time Gene arrives in the ER, his breathing is so labored he can barely speak. Fearing pneumonia, doctors decide to admit him to run a battery of tests. His family could never have imagined the shocking series of events that lay ahead. Across the valley, the aftermath of the quake reveals the massive scope of the damage. Thousands of homes have been red tagged, condemned as dangerous and unlivable. Her own home destroyed, single mother Michelle Benton and her young son are forced to seek shelter with her closest friend.
Everybody during that time was staying with each other, and we were banding together. It was a very scary time.
But finding refuge is the least of Michelle's problems. She too has a nasty and persistent cough.
She developed kind of a hacking cough that wouldn't go away. That night, then a sweat started to come with that too.
After days of searing headaches and sleepless nights, Michelle is at the brink of delirium. She's rushed to the hospital, unaware that she's part of a crisis that will sweep the city. emergency rooms across the valley are suddenly plagued by a surge of unexplained respiratory illness. At the Ventura County Department of Health, Dr. Gary Feldman begins to see a disturbing trend.
These reports started to come in, and the increase was dramatic.
As the shocking rise in mysterious illness continues to climb, Dr. Feldman realizes it's time to sound the alarm and call the Centers for Disease Control.
And we started putting our heads together to figure out what it meant and what to do about it.
It's an enormous task. Throughout the valley, hospitals are still dealing with the onslaught of over 12,000 victims from the earthquake. But something more sinister lurks beneath the surface. Within 48 hours, Eugene Cole has gone from bad to worse. He has lapsed into a coma and been placed on life support.
He started progressively getting worse. They had to strap his hands up in the air because they were turning black. His internal organs were starting to break down. And it was just, the situation was grim.
X-rays reveal a black spot on Gene's lung, the possible source of the infection. To take a closer look, doctors plunge a bronchoscope down into his lungs to gather samples. The lab will culture the fluid. The results will take weeks, but unfortunately, Gene's days are limited. As illness spreads through the valley, Michelle Benton is examined at Olive View Hospital. Dr. Glenn Matheson investigates her baffling symptoms.
She had what we call photophobia. She couldn't tolerate the light.
Michelle's sister Charisse has rushed to her side.
She was developing sores all over her body, on the surface of her arms and her chest and her face and her legs, just everywhere.
Fever, night sweats, pain, and now horrifying skin lesions. Doctors take samples of the pustules on Michelle's arm for testing. In a desperate attempt to stop the spread of the infection, Michelle is placed in full isolation.
I got a little worried that this is something that maybe I could get or the kids could get, because I thought, oh my God, am I gonna be next?
Southern California still convulses from the aftershocks of the largest earthquake to hit an urban area in North American history. But while the news media focuses all of its attention on the aftermath, a vicious, mysterious outbreak is silently sweeping through the valley. And at Olive View Hospital, one of these victims, single mother Michelle Benton, lies near death, battling her mysterious infection for 3 weeks.
They quarantined Michelle. There was a plastic around her bed, and we couldn't be too close to her, but they wouldn't tell us what was wrong with her. So it was a very, very scary situation.
Doctors are bewildered by Michelle's complex combination of symptoms. They test for autoimmune diseases such as HIV, lupus, and tuberculosis. But all the results come back negative. Dr. Matheson is baffled, but then he re-examines a subtle but important symptom.
She complained of headache for 3 or 4 weeks. That is very classic in certain types of meningitis.
Michelle's infection may be causing a painful and often fatal swelling of the protective tissue that surrounds her brain and spinal cord, meningitis. A CT scan confirms Dr. Matheson's suspicions, but it doesn't tell him what's causing the painful and lethal swelling.
In her case, she had been sick for 4 weeks. Most of the things that cause bacterial and viral meningitis can kill you within 24 hours.
Unfortunately for Michelle, the road to an answer is a painful one.
The spinal tap is the absolute key to making the diagnosis of meningitis.
Michelle must remain absolutely still during the procedure. One flinch could mean instant paralysis.
Clearly a painful process. You have a needle that's about 3 or 4 inches long, and you press directed into the right area in the spine. And then we take off fluid called cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF, from around the brain. And hopefully you get it on the first shot. And then we take a large volume of that fluid and we send it off for cultures, and we send it off for additional testing.
The lab results will take weeks to develop. But until that time, doctors must constantly drain the dangerous fluid that is continually accumulating in her brain. Back at North Hollywood Medical Center, doctors have finally reached a diagnosis for Gene Cole. The infection ravaging his body is caused by a vicious fungal spore. Coccidioidomycosis is an infectious and deadly airborne pathogen, more commonly known as valley fever.
Valley fever is the common name for the infection that's caused by a fungus called Coccidioides that lives in the soil in what we call the mold state. These spores can become aerosolized, and then you inhale the spores from the fungus. The fungus can actually spread to areas of the body, including the spinal cord, the bones. Almost any part of the body can be affected. At the CDC, we do a lot of research on valley fever. This is an agent that is very easily aerosolized, so even in a controlled setting, you need to have something called BSL-3 safety precautions.
The Biosafety Level 3 labs are used when investigators need to contain the most virulent pathogens while they study them. The spores are small and deadly. 15 trillion spores can occupy a single cubic inch of air. It only takes one to cause a potentially deadly infection, which is tragic. For Gene Cole, this diagnosis has come too late to save him.
I mean, it really went downhill quick. I mean, you see somebody upright and viral and ready, ready to rock and roll one day, and in 5 days, he's dead.
Eugene Cole's horror is over, but for the thousands of victims in the valley, it's just starting.
People can get valley fever just from walking down the street. A lot of these infections are quite severe, often leading to very severe incapacitation and also death.
Gene's death is reported to the Ventura County Health Department. He's the first death in the alarming outbreak of valley fever cases.
We started hearing about a scattering of deaths, so we're talking about a really dramatic phenomenon.
The clock is ticking for 10 million people. Nowhere is safe from a vicious fungal killer. It infects the very air they breathe, but where it's coming from, nobody knows.